BJJ Suomi live, Mr. Robert Drysdale.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello to everyone in Suomi. I've been there many times. It's great people, great country. So I'm happy to be here sharing some of my experience with you guys.
Yes, you have been in Finland quite a few times, I think, like at least 2-3 times, if I'm not incorrect.
Probably more. I'd say maybe 4 or 5. Always with Yuri Moneyman and his club. Way back in the day when it was still called grappling boxing. I think it was GB Gym. I think that was the first time I went to Finland, Helsinki. And I've been back a few times. I think the last time I was there was for the ADCC, which is ironic because I was in Helsinki for like during the ADCC and I didn't see the ADCC at all. I was just hanging out with Yuri the whole time.
Well, sometimes it is like that. You also been traveling around the world for Jiu-Jitsu quite a lot, and of course, you being the IBJJF world champion and ADCC world champion, you have quite a broad view of Jiu-Jitsu world at this moment. How do you see the Jiu-Jitsu world evolving at this moment?
I think when I first started Jiu-Jitsu back in like, end of 97, beginning of 98, I think that, there was, by the time I was like maybe like 2000, like 2-3 years into Jiu-Jitsu, I think there was an expectation for both Vale Tudo and Jiu-Jitsu to blow up around the world. Vale Tudo later became known as MMA. Jiu-Jitsu later became known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ironically, no Brazilian has ever called it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But, but that's what it became known in around the world. And those two things, I think that there was an expectation for what is happening now to happen. So I can't say I'm surprised because when we first found, both Jiu-Jitsu and MMA, because at that time it was the same thing. I think we all knew we had found something special. It was highly addictive. It was amazing culture. It was fun. It was engaging. And, like we would see other martial artists would try it out and they would stick to it. Like it was very common for guys to leave judo and join Jiu-Jitsu club and like never go back. And so we knew we had something, and we knew that MMA was superior to boxing. It was so obvious. This is way better than boxing. Like, why are these boxers making millions and these Vale Tudo fighters in Brazil making nothing when they're clearly better fighters? Like, there's not even a question. So I think that I'm not so surprised, but it's good to see the growth, even though it has any kind of growth. I think has its positives and its negatives. I think there's been some really good stuff and then some really bad stuff too, and they coexist.
Yeah, and you also have been writing a book, and I think there's a film project as well about the history of Jiu-Jitsu that you are doing at the moment. I think I saw some pictures that you have released your book, and you already have some people who have gotten their book already. So can you tell me a little bit about that project?
Yes. Well, it started about 3 years ago. I became increasingly interested in the history of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil. And I realized at some point that I had never seen any kind of serious study on the history of Jiu-Jitsu. I have a history major. I have an unfinished master's. And, at some point I realized like everything we have ever heard about the history of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil comes down to the testimony of basically Carlos Gracie. Like there wasn't a lot out there. There were no studies. I had never seen anything. And one day accidentally I bumped into this book called Choque, The Untold Story of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil by Roberto Pedreira. They're available on Amazon, CHOQUE. Highly recommended. They're very dense. They're not easy reads. They're not it's not a novel. It doesn't read like a novel. It reads like academic paper, and it's quite heavy for most people. But, it's very informative. And the story that was coming across was very different than the one that we had heard. And I've found some similar, with some books in Brazil with some of the same sources. They were in Portuguese. They were less academic oriented. There was less rigor to them, but they was still very rich. And once again, the narrative was very different than the one we had heard of. And I would ask my friends, "Have you guys ever heard of this?" And everyone's like, "No." And I'm like, "You sure you never heard of this?" And I would ask some of the old timers, people that have been in Jiu-Jitsu longer than me. And the answer was always like, the reaction was either Rob's lost his mind and he's making stuff up, or no, I've never heard of this. Like it was one of the two. No one had even heard of some of the names that I was dropping. So I'm like, huh, there might be more. Why are no people why are not more people talking about this? And I realized is that these books were so dense that the average jiu-jitsu practitioner just couldn't reach them. Like it was to most people that they can't either, they're not interested in reading, or if they do, they have a hard time finishing whatever reason, right? So I thought that maybe a film would be a good way of creating a bridge between a large audience and this academic work that was really changing the way we saw martial arts in Brazil. And that's when it started. You know, we found a filming crew, we raised the money, and we've been working on it for 3 years now. We're a little late, you know, but for some of the reasons that, you know, could blame my lack of experience. I know nothing about filmmaking. And now I know something, but at the time I knew zero. Now I know like I'm maybe a blue belt. And you know, some of the COVID really slowed us down. We were planning on releasing the film during the summer, but COVID really slowed us down in ways that we weren't anticipating. And so I wrote a book in the meantime. So during quarantine, I wrote a book that expands on the film, because one thing I wasn't too happy about was that I wasn't going to be able to get all the information we had in the film, because a film is only 90 minutes long, and no matter how rich it is, you can't get everything in a film. It's impossible. So I wrote a book to go along with it and complete that story, complete that narrative, give insight and perspectives that weren't going to make it into the film, but that would enrich the history of jiu-jitsu. The book is out. We have some people in Finland that have bought the copy already, so it's already in Finland. And yeah, so the movie may be out, you know, within the next month or two. It's hard to say because it's not dependent on me. But the book has been out for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah. Well, documenting history, there's one good perk about it, that it doesn't matter if it's a couple of months late, it never gets old. History will stay the same as it was before that, and will remain after neither one of us are here anymore. And I myself, I'm a big history buff, and I also a minor in history now that I've started studying in the university as well. So I really enjoy history, and when I saw the project, I was really excited, because me, and you probably remember Jasse from Finland as well, from grappling and boxing gym as well. And he's done a ton of research as well, and I've read his research, and he's very interested, and we've had like long discussions about about the history of jiu-jitsu, like general history of jiu-jitsu, and of course the history of Brazilian jiu-jitsu as we know it. And there has been like, I didn't know about the book, and I haven't bought the book yet. I assume that Jasse is one of the persons who has actually purchased the books. So I haven't read the book yet, but what I've seen from the Instagram page of the project, I've learned a tons, like the connection between the Francas and the Gracies, which I've always thought that the Franca and the Franca lineage and it kind of has like went around Gracies and never trained under Gracies. But in the lineage that you have on your Instagram page, Franca's line is under the Gracie line. So that was kind of a new information for me too.
Yeah, you know, when I first started talking about this project, everyone was like, "Oh, so you guys are going to talk about the fathers, right?" Everyone thought the film was going to be about the non-Gracie lineage, right? And then what we quickly learned was that there's a widespread myth on the internet, Wikipedia, websites, interviews, saying that, you know, Novo União and GF Team are lineages outside of the Gracie family, that they are, you know, strict Maeda. And everyone, I mean, it's a widespread, like I have to find myself proving a negative, like, you know, like I find myself often, I'm like, no, but you guys got no evidence for that. But it is. I'm like, but there's no evidence. Like, where'd you guys get that from? And you ask people who are saying that, like, provide me evidence, and they can't do it because there is none. And I spend quite some time talking to every historian on the planet that actually knows anything about this history, and they all agree. So one thing that historians disagree on everything, but like the one thing that they all agree on is that there's no link between Luis França and Maeda. It's just, it's França said that, for at least, you know, according to Fada, according to Antonio Vieira, another one of his students, França used to say that. Now, France is not the only one to claim a direct lineage under Maeda. Everyone was doing it in Brazil because Maeda was famous. So it was a very common thing. It wasn't just him. Like a number of Brazilians did it. They wanted to get credibility in a time where if you weren't Japanese, you had no credibility. It's kind of like Brazilian in the late 90s in the US versus being American. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but you're American. I'm a Thai boxing instructor, but you're American. How can you be a Thai boxing instructor? It's one of those things. Like if you're a native from the country where the art comes from, you have immediate credibility. So the closer you are to that lineage, I learned it from a Japanese, the more credible you are in the eyes of your customers. So it was common for these guys to lie, exaggerate, distort. And you know, it might be possible. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. It's just that there's no evidence for it. As in right now, I wrote an article about this. If you're really interested in digging into this, if you just Google GTR FADA Drysdale, it'll come up right away. I wrote an article in quite detail about this alleged relationship and what the evidence we have actually suggests versus what is a widespread myth on the internet.
That's very interesting. We had Wendell Alexander teaching a seminar at our gym, like at least 10 years, maybe 11 years ago. And like probably many of us know, Wendell Alexander is the co-founder of Nova Union, and he has always been very vocal about being a France and FADA student who has no linkage in Gracie. So that was where I got my my information about. I didn't even know about France or FADA before Bruno Bastos came to teach at our school, and that's when I heard about those guys. And then we had the Wendell, and we talk a little bit about the history and stuff like that. But that is very interesting, and that kind of makes sense to kind of like, because in martial arts there has always been, like, not in jiu-jitsu, but in like martial arts generally, there has always been people who claim to be somebody's student even they are not. Like they train in some other place and then they say that, oh well, but at least I was this guy's student more than that other guy's student. And what I have found out is the same thing with Carlos Gracie, and especially with Helio Gracie, that they didn't actually train under Mitsuo Maeda that much. They trained at the school, but they didn't train with him that much as it is reported.
Yeah, what's what's interesting about that relationship is that, I mean, there's no evidence for it either. That's the other thing. People get angry, like, you know. So now I'm hated by both the like the really pro Carlos camp and the pro Fada camp. I managed to make it, but it's. I'm not being like. I'm just, you know, repeating what A, historians say. B, being trying to be pragmatic and analyzing the evidence objectively versus going like, oh, I have an emotional attachment to this narrative, so we have to make it work somehow. And that's, you know, that's not what we should be doing. So we got to look at things objectively and go like, what does the evidence say? And the evidence does not link Carlos to Maeda either. There's nothing other than Carlos's Gracie own testimony. Now, some people fire back, but Carlos's father was a circus owner, and Maeda fought in that circus, and that's true. So there's a very strong case to be made between the relationship between Carlos's father and Maeda, and that's people don't really, you know, argue. That's pretty straightforward. But to draw the assumption that his son was training with Maeda at the time because of that, now that's a jump. That's a jump, because I have many friends in Las Vegas. They all have children, and their children don't all train with me. Some of their kids train with me, some of them don't. And they're good friends of mine, but their kids sometimes don't train jiu-jitsu at all. So, you know, imagine if 100 years from now, people going around, oh, for sure my son trained with, or so-and-so's son trained with Robert. Why? Because the father was Robert's friend. Well, that's not evidence, you know, but people draw that conclusion. And I'm not saying he didn't. I think my guess, you know, if you really put a gun to my head and had me guess, I think he did for a very short period of time, even though he exaggerated it. But that's not, my opinion is not evidence either. So, you know, we have to analyze things as they are, not as we think they may be, right? And we do have an article from 1921 pointing between a match between a man called Carlos Gracie and Donato Pires. I mean, Oscar Gracie, by the way. Seems to be a typographical error from the journalist at the time when he wrote the article. It's probably Carlos, but the name Gracie is there. It's very important that the name Gracie is there. And it's a match between Oscar Gracie and Donato Pires dos Reis, who has like, he's going to be very important later on in the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But what's interesting about the article is that the article refers to both these students as students of Jacinto Ferro. even though Maeda is present at the event as a judge. Maeda is the judge of the fight. But the article does not point Maeda as their instructor. It points Jacinto Ferro as their instructor. This is very important because Jacinto Ferro was Maeda's main student in the Amazon. So it's very clear that, you know, not just Carlos, but Donato Pires dos Reis did the same thing. They cut the middleman. You don't want linkage with a short little black Brazilian. You want what? You want lineage with Maeda, of course. You know, so it was not uncommon for people to do that. And it was very, very, it was a marketing thing, and it works because it gave them credibility at a time where they had none. Now, if tomorrow something else is found and that changes the story, well, that's tomorrow. As in right now, there's no concrete evidence. Even though, you know, it is clear that Carlos had some training, you know, because he's in a match with Donato Pires dos Reis. So it's clearly he was training. Although Oscar could be Osvaldo as well. There's a small possibility that's Osvaldo, but Osvaldo might have been too young. So it's unlikely that it's him, but it's not impossible. It's not, you know, it's quite plausible that it was Osvaldo, but given his age, it's very likely to be Carlos Gracie, who was older.
Osvaldo, is he the youngest of the Gracies, or is he middle second? Like he's middle between Elio and Carlos?
No, it goes Carlos, Osvaldo, I believe it was George, Gaston, Helio. So Osvaldo.
Okay. So Helio was clearly the youngest. Yeah.
Yes, Osvaldo was 2 years younger than Carlos, so it could potentially been him, but it's unlikely because Carlos was already really young. Osvaldo would have been even younger. So,
yeah,
you know, and Carlos did seem to take, like, he obviously took a lead amongst his brothers, but it's impossible to say because the journalist who wrote the article doesn't really, you know, it's a typographical error. So we're never going to know for sure who it was.
All right. That's very interesting. And like I said, like in martial arts in general, we can just like go one step further from the Gracies. Even Jigoro Kano has like many times been put as the instructor of Mitsuo Maeda. Actually, Maeda never trained with Kano as well. He was just kind of like bought for the Kodokan to be kind of like a representative of Jiu-Jitsu across the world. So that was, and I think still is pretty common in a world of martial arts to kind of like maybe kind of like forget one guy in the middle to be associated with the bigger guy. And I see it in Jiu-Jitsu teams at the moment as well. Like in the big teams, people associate with Fabio Gurgel or Carson Gracie Jr. or people like those who they probably met in a seminar or something like that, and they pride themselves of being their students if they had kind of like their signature in a certificate or something like that, even though they have never been in a student and teacher relationship with those masters.
And it's very common because here's the thing: when you're selling martial arts, you're often selling it to beginners, people who have never trained before. That's normally the case. And for someone who doesn't know anything about martial arts, who you learned it from is the whole story. It's not the years of training, your training partners, your tournaments. That's like almost like a backseat. It's like the lineage is the whole story if you're a beginner at this. Now, the more you understand martial arts and the more you understand its history, the less important lineages are. It's ironic that historians spend so much time, you know, explaining this to people because it's not that relevant. Like I always say this, and because people think that I'm discrediting Carlos when I say that there's no evidence for him training with Maeda, and it's not what we're doing. Carlos is a cornerstone of jiu-jitsu history in Brazil, regardless. It's what he did that matters, not who allegedly taught him. Whether he learned from Maeda, Jacinto Ferro, or Gio Amori, or Donato Pires dos Reis, it's not that it's not important, but to me, it's more of a curiosity. Now, Carlos's role is central because he took a practice that would have been absorbed into Kodokan's judo, and he created a space for what we now call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to exist. He didn't do this alone, but he was a very important character in this, and this is very important. That role is it's far more important than the one they give him credit for. Oh, he was a student of Maeda. That's not that relevant in the grand scheme of things. But beginners put a lot of emphasis on these things because who did you learn from? That's the whole story. Because you can have a legend of a coach and be a crappy student. And then you can have a crappy coach and be a legend of an athlete. We've seen that. So it's just because your student, your teacher was a legend and like someone like it doesn't give you, it doesn't mean you're going to be on his level or that you absorbed all that knowledge from that coach. Sometimes it's the other way around. You get the crappy coach and he's like a phenomenal student. I have seen that in jiu-jitsu more times than I can count, where a guy that barely knows jiu-jitsu produces world champions. It doesn't seem possible, but I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, the lineage thing is it's blown out of proportion. This is one reason I was a little hesitant to publish that lineage, because it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. I'm saying it's not important, yet I am, you know, writing up a chart, a graphic of the lineage. But it's to help people understand it better. But it's in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that relevant.
Yeah. But when you're making a documentary about the history, it becomes more relevant. Like that is the history. Like that is the beginning of the starting. That's the starting point of the journey. Like where did he start? Who did he start with? And how did that situation created itself? So it's kind of like in a grand scheme, like you said, it's not that important. Like it doesn't matter if he was training with Maeda or if he was training with somebody else. Jiu-Jitsu was created global, and there's few key persons to be thanked of that. And for sure, Carlos Gracie is like the main elements of those expansions of Jiu-Jitsu globally. Like if without his work, I don't think we would be talking right now. You know what I mean?
We would be doing judo if it weren't for the
probably, yeah.
And that, to me, that's a far more important piece of information than whether Carlos learned from Maeda or not. Like that's the key piece of information. Like we would all be doing judo if it were not for Carlos and Helio being incredibly stubborn and going, no, 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 no. This is how we're going to do things. We're going to do it differently. Was it out of nobility? I personally don't think so. I think it was out of, we want to be the leaders. We don't want to fall within the ranks of the Kodokan and just be another one amongst thousands. We want to be leaders. We belong in a special place. They had this ethos about them, right? Yeah. And they follow that very, very thoroughly, and they believe in it, and they pass it on to their kids. And it's very present in the family to this day. And I don't condemn it. I actually admire it. Like I say this sincerely. I admire the ambition. I don't always admire the methods. I say this, I talk a lot about this in my book. I don't always admire the methods, but I do admire the ambition.
Yeah. And like judo in Brazil as well. Mitsuo Maeda had huge impact on judo in Brazil as well. So it could have been easily to be just another branch of Kodokan.
It's interesting. There's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just was saying that if the Gracies wouldn't be that stubborn, so it could have just been a branch of judo for those guys as well.
We asked Hobson Gracie today. He's the father of Renzo Gracie, Ralph Gracie, right? Of the late Ryan Gracie. He's the patriarch of the Gracie family. He's the oldest Gracie alive. So he's a patriarch. And we asked him, it's like, would Jiu-Jitsu exist today if it were not for your father? And he goes like this. Oh, I can't remember the exact question. I remember his answer better than I remember my question, but it's in the book. Like if you read the book, you'll see it. And he goes like this. Who would Maeda be without my father? He would be a legend of the Amazon. Like there might have been like some enthusiastic Japanese who knew about him, but he would have been just another immigrant. If it weren't for my father, the jiu-jitsu man, who would be Maeda? And it clicked on me when he answered that. We gave that answer. I'm like, wow, it wasn't Maeda who created Carlos. It was Carlos who created Maeda. There's a picture of Maeda at the Kodokan Museum. I was there. There's a picture of Maeda at the Kodokan Museum. I don't think that picture would be there if it were not for the marketing efforts of Carlos Gracie. Maeda is remembered primarily because of Carlos. If you took out the Carlos, you know what happened to Maeda's grave in 1983 and again in like 2008? In 1980, it was the grave. There was a storm in Belém do Pará, and the bones were the grave was destroyed, and Maeda's bones are all over the place. No one cleaned it up. No one cared. No one cared because in 1982 or 83, whenever it was, no one knew who Maeda was. No one remembered. No one cared about him. He was dead in the Amazon, right? You know who fixed it? Lyoto Mashida's father. Lyoto Mashida's father went there with a Japanese university, picked up the bones, they cleaned them up, and they built him a new grave. Now, how awesome is that story? And then later in 1993, when the UFC blew up, all Americans are asking, where'd you guys learn this jiu-jitsu from? And now all of a sudden they go, wait a second. Oh, yeah. There's that gun guy, Maeda. And now Maeda becomes the center of the story all of a sudden. But up to then, no one remembered him. He's not mentioned in the press after that. Like, Brazilians didn't know who he was. So I think that Hobson is correct. If it were not for his father, I don't think anyone would know who Maeda is today.
That is very, very exciting, kind of like revelation to me. Like, that is exactly true. I don't know. I've never been in Kodokan, so I don't know whose pictures are on the wall. But there has been hundreds of Japanese immigrants all around the world spreading Jiu-Jitsu in the 1910, 1920s, when Kodokan was spreading like wildfire around the world. I don't think that every one of them has their name or their picture on the wall.
They don't.
Especially when they have already been once disowned by Kodokan. Like, if the story is true that Maeda was kicked out from Kodokan because he was taking challenge matches when he was young, why would his picture be on the wall if he would have been just another teacher? But because he created, like, through his efforts, like through his teachings, created something that was very huge, that judo can kind of like call that, okay, this is kind of like our little brother.
Yeah.
Then Maeda became big in Kodokan as well.
Yes, and you're right. Like, if you ever go to the Kodokan Museum, they have the picture of the four guardians. You know, obviously Jigoro Kano, but there's not many others. There are very few Japanese who they honor, and I believe that in some way, by honoring Mitsui Maeda, they're really they're acknowledging BJJ as part of their branch. Like, this is our offshoot. Whether Brazilians acknowledge it or not is a different story. But the Kodokan goes like, yeah. Well, we did that too, which is true. That's at the end of the day, we don't do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we do Brazilian Judo. We do Brazilian Kodokan. That's what we do. You know, we just call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it's not Jiu-Jitsu, it's Judo.
Yeah.
And I think Hobson was one of my favorite guys to talk to because he was so frank, so outspoken, and he embodied that Gracie ethos that I was telling you about. Like, I think he embodies it more than any other member of the family. Like, just talking to him, you can get a sense of their idealism and how they perceive themselves and how they perceive the world and their ambition. And once again, like, I don't always agree with the methods. Like, at one point, like the opening quote for his section of the book, there's a chapter about him, right? And the opening section goes, and he's talking about his youth, right? And he was like, oh yeah, we would see the capoeiras on the street and we just start fighting. And we would pair up like 4 and 4, 5 and 5. If it was mismatch, we'd call our brothers. They'd call, hey, we got to fight here on Ipanema Beach, Posto 9. And then the brothers would run there and they would pair them up right there on the street and they would start fighting. And then he would go, and we would fight right then and there. We would scrap. And he'd go, what a beautiful thing. And he's so magic about it. He's so romantic about it. On one hand, you're like, man, this guy's a lunatic. But at the same time, it's like he was so, you could see when he's telling that, like remembering how they used to just fight on the streets with the capoeiras. You know, you can't help but admire him at the same time because, he's being very sincere. And at the end of the day, that was a key ingredient in our history. Like, I don't think we would have survived the onslaught of judo had they not done what they did. Like, they were literally challenging people on the streets. They would dojo storm. They would fight on the beach. They would fight where they had to. They did what they had to do to keep their branch of judo alive. They call it Jiu-Jitsu, but they kept it alive long enough for the UFC to exist. So it's an incredible story when you really think about it. And you have to admire the role and the ambition of the Gracie brothers primarily. I think some members of the Gracie families did more harm than good, if you ask me. But in terms of Carlos and Helio, you have to admire their ambition.
For sure. And like, I've always acknowledged the fact that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has grown and has started in the egoistic and most macho culture in the world. And that has molded the Jiu-Jitsu as we know at the moment to be what it is right now. Without all those challenge matches, without all those street fights, and without all that attitude about being the absolute best of everything, I don't think we have ever seen mixed martial arts, or we would have never seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a global sport as it is now, or ADCC that became after Jiu-Jitsu and UFC. And I interviewed Rickson Gracie 2013 for a magazine that I was writing for, and I asked about him about his MMA record, because I wanted to have like a fact box of everybody that I interviewed for the for the for the for the magazine. And I asked, like, the question that I asked from everybody is like, is your MMA record that is on Wikipedia, is it correct? And like that was in China before ADCC, and Kron Gracie was cutting weight in the next room, and Rickson sitting in the couch and was like, man, I don't know about Wikipedia, but if I count all my jiu-jitsu fights, my MMA fights, and challenge fights, and some of the most important street fights that I've had, I fought more than 400 times and I never lost. And then I was like, okay, let's move on. It's
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I don't like marketing personally. I'll tell you why I don't like marketing. It seems to me as a deceitful way of tapping into all these glitches in human psychology, all these loopholes, and exploiting that for profit. I don't like that. You know, people want to hear the incredible story. People want to hear the myth of creation. We use that, like one of our interviewees uses that term, myth. We like that. Like, we need that because someone's got to be superhero. Like, because we're too normal. I'm too normal. You're too normal. So there's got to be some guy out there who's not normal, so I can use as a reference. And of course, if you see these people up close, you're going to be disappointed because they're going to realize they're just as human as you, right? But these stories, they embellish the person. They and you make more money that way, because there are a lot of people that will buy books, they will pay for seminars if you convince them that you're supernatural, right? The second you tell them you're a human, they're not interested in you anymore, right? So it sells. But I mean, it's as simple as this. If you have a record of 400-0, or anyone for that matter, it only means one thing: you've not fighting the best in the world. That's all it means. K.O. Sanderson had a flawless record in college. I think he won like 300 matches without losing. That was flawless. You know when it happened, when he fought in the world championship? He lost to a Chechen, or I think it was what's his name? Satiev. There's someone out there that's going to beat you, man. There's no way out. Sure. There's someone out there that is going to beat you, and it's no way around that. That's the history of the world. There's always, and you have an Achilles heel. We always do. No exception.
And to be honest about Rickson Gracie, he is not undefeated. Like, there's a record of him losing a sambo match at least. So there's that. And I'm 100% sure that he has also lost some of the street fights or his jiu-jitsu matches or whatever he likes to count on that 400. He just doesn't count them as important enough to be on that kind of record that he's portraying.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I like the human side. I prefer the flawed human over the perfect one. Like, to me, it's an easier picture to look at. Like, whenever I hear like the supernatural stories, I just roll my eyes. I'm like, you don't really believe that, do you? But you know, it did serve a purpose. I spoke to Sergio Pena once. Sergio Pena is the guy who was winning until 20 seconds left. Yeah. I'm not sure quite what happened. They stopped the match with 20 seconds left and they restarted it from the beginning. But Sergio Pena was beating Rickson because Rickson gassed out, right? So I asked him, like, he told me the story. I wish I remembered better what the story was, but it sounds like he got screwed. But he was like, basically, it was good for jiu-jitsu that I lost. So I was trying to understand that. And I'm like, I see what he's saying. Is that overall, like, Sergio Pena is not Rickson Gracie. And it is good for the history of the sport if we have someone who's a superhero who always wins, because it helped promote jiu-jitsu. And it's true. Like, that myth of invincibility helped the sport. It helped me. It helped you. It helped everyone. Everyone who lives in jiu-jitsu was benefited from that narrative. But it's just not true. It's like the narrative that Helio was weak. It's not true. Helio was an elite swimmer before he did jiu-jitsu. He was not a weakling. I got pictures of Helio, man. He looks like he's on steroids. I don't think he was. He clearly wasn't. But like, he looks buff, man. He looks buff. He's not weak. He's an elite swimmer. You're not an elite swimmer unless you're a good athlete. I'm sorry, but the myth helped us, helped me, helped you, helped everyone with jiu-jitsu. So there is a place for mythology, I guess.
Okay, we lost the voice. God, we're on again?
Yeah, I think I lost you there for a second, man. My bad.
Yeah.
So where was
we were
I?
talking about Helio Gracie's physique.
Yeah, he was a very athletic guy, and you
Yeah.
know, I think artists like that. The myth, and the myth serves us well. But I personally don't like it. I think that people should be mature enough to appreciate Helio's role, which is very important and very central, without, you know, making like, oh, I invented jiu-jitsu. No, he didn't, you know, and that's fine. He had an important role. You don't have to lie to make it to be important. No, Hickson was not invincible. No, yes, he picked his fights. Of course he did. He was incredible. Yes, he was the best of his era. He's still, we are all standing on Hickson Gracie's shoulders. That's the truth of the matter. Not just his, but the shoulders of many other people. That's why we can see further. But and is invincible is simply not true, and it's unfair with a lot of people, and it's just plain inaccurate. It's kind of dumb too. Like, I just don't see why people need that. It's not true. Like, why do you need a lie to you appreciate his role in jiu-jitsu or to appreciate jiu-jitsu? I mean, it's just, to me, it's just a matter of like critical. You don't need these things for martial arts to be incredible. I think it's even better if the fact that he's beatable, that he's not perfect, makes the sport even better. It gives everyone else a chance.
Yeah. I think one of the things that all the Gracies have been very good at is marketing. Like, they have had, like, in all those times that they have marketed themselves, they've done quite of like little bit outrageous stuff, but they have done it really well. Like having a poster on a magazine saying that if you want your arms breaking and your ribs broken, contact Carlos Gracie, or having 400 and all Hickson Gracie, or having Hoist Gracie, who is not the biggest guy of the family or not the buffest guy of the family, to fight for the UFC. And quite frankly, not having the hottest wrestlers and the best Muay Thai guys to fight him, but to have like a variety of martial arts that he can actually beat, and he knows how to beat those guys. Yeah. Those kinds of promotions and those kind of marketing they have done really, really well, which has always been very good for Jiu-Jitsu to grow and like to have kind of a perfect kind of contradicting platform to step over. You know what I mean? Kind of like, okay, we have this guy who wants to break everybody's arms, so we have to go and check what is happening there. And even though nobody's going there, they just go to some beach or to some capoeira gym or karate gym and just beat the shit out of everybody there and kind of like validate themselves as toughest and the most valuable martial artist in the planet at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. That was the recipe. And you know, one thing we try to tackle in the film, you know, once again, I go in more depth in this in the book, I feel like, is all the ingredients that made Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu possible. So I think that's the ultimate, a purpose of the book is what were the ingredients and players and events that made Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu possible. And that's one of them. It was their way of like, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to do it this way. I mentioned their education. You know, I call it a Spartan education. You know, you're going to eat this way. You're going to train jiu-jitsu. This is how, you know, we're going to, they had a very unusual upbringing, you know, and in some ways I admire that too, you know, but that was an ingredient because it kept the family very cohesive in some ways, at least in terms of their, you know, how they related to jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu was that one thing that glue that kept the family together, because most families split. Even if you got 21 kids, families go in different directions. Like they, for the most part, even though it's a big family, they stuck to jiu-jitsu. It's the one thing they have in common, right? They all do jiu-jitsu. And I think that's very obviously, it's a business as well, so there's that too. But at a time when it wasn't a business and there was no money, they still stuck to it. And that's what's so admirable, because it's easy to say, oh, let's stick to jiu-jitsu today. There's tons of money to be made if you're born with a Gracie surname, which is true. But in the 1970s, there wasn't. In the 1970s, there was no money to be made. There was not. In the 1980s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, there's nothing. Kiddos, silence. There's nothing going on. It's absolute silence in Brazil. They're not making any money. They're not rich. Yet, they stuck to it. So, there's clearly they identify themselves with jiu-jitsu, and that was a very important ingredient in this whole story. I don't want to say it again. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. I understand completely. I have 3 kids, so I know exactly what's happening there. I think the same recipe is used today as well, like blowing yourself on your, like, of course you can't just like talk and say that you are the best, even if you're not able to prove that you are the best. Like, one person comes instantly to my mind is Gordon Ryan, who is actually saying that he's not doing anything different what jiu-jitsu pioneers did like 100 years ago almost.
And it's true. And it's true. He's not doing, he has a bigger microphone. The only difference is it was a small microphone, which was called the printed press, which is the only way to get your word out there. And you had to walk to the newspaper headquarters and convince the journalist to write a story about you. Now you have your own platform, which is social media, and you can say whatever you want. And the truth of the matter is, half the people will believe you. It doesn't matter what you say. I think it was Liam Gallagher from Oasis, and he kept saying over and over and over, the greatest rock and roll band since the Beatles. And they kept saying that over and over. Now musicians probably listen to that and go like, get the hell out of here, And I watched an interview with him once, and he said this: it doesn't matter if it's true or not. If you keep saying it, 50% of the people will believe you. And it's true. Yeah. Gordon Ryan keeps saying, I'm the best of all time. 50% of the people that are listening to that aren't equipped enough with intellectual capacity to determine that he's just, even though he's very good, I wouldn't rank him the top 10 of all time, in all honesty. But if you keep saying it, it becomes the truth, especially in the age of social media where perception is reality. So it is very effective. It's also very dishonest. So they correlate. And I don't know if you saw it. I just finished watching that documentary, Social Dilemma. You should watch it if you haven't. It's great. And it talks a lot about this. And everyone's blaming social media. And I'm like, I'm blaming people. I'm sorry. I'm not blaming Facebook. I'm blaming people.
Like, let's go back 10, 15 years. And the reason of people being dumb was claimed to be that they don't have access to information. And now that everybody has an access to all kinds of information in the world, we are actually proving how dumb of
it's worse.
Yes. like suddenly we are dumber than we were 15, 20 years ago. And
I never thought that'd be possible, but it is.
That is true. Yeah. But what do you think that, like, there has been a lot of jiu-jitsu fighters who have tried to like imitate the Gordon's antics at the moment, and like we have seen, it's been a winning method of promoting yourself for 100 years in jiu-jitsu. But why doesn't it pay for everybody else like it pays for Gordon Ryan, for example?
Because he actually wins more than everyone else, and you got to give it to him. The difference between him and the people who are just talking smack on the internet, he actually wins. And that's the difference. And he does have a point. He's like, yeah, I'm talking shit, but I'm winning, which is true. Granted, very specific about his arena. He's very you can see the exchanges between him and Felipe Pena. He lost twice to Felipe Pena, and he still wants to pick the rule set. I'm like, dude, you lost twice in a row. You don't get to pick the rule set. Put a gi on and shut up, But he keeps bringing the fight to his turf, and that's exactly what the Gracie family did too. Like Carlton Healy were like, no time limit, no points, short sleeves, and they battled the Japanese on that. And the Japanese would lose their minds and they go, okay, I'll fight you in your rules, and then it'd be a draw. And I go, I really won. I didn't get tapped, so I really won. So man, we have a marketing machine like that. You're invincible. Like, you write history. That's what history is. It's the repetition of whatever narrative you want to come across. And if you're relentless and you have a big microphone, that becomes reality. once again, it's incredibly dishonest, but you know, who to blame? Are you going to blame the guy who's lying? Yeah, he's partially to blame. The people who are believing are equally to blame. That's my impression. If you're believing this, if you without scrutiny believe that, you know, Gordon Ryan's the greatest of all time because he said so, even though his record is not on par with the records of other people who have done far more than him, then I don't know what to tell you. You're to blame, as to blame as he is. And it's not just, it's everything, you know, it's a cultural phenomenon. It's not just jiu-jitsu, it's worldwide. It permeates politics, the culture wars, you name it. It's everywhere. People just, they're being educated by internet algorithms. Essentially, that's, long story short, that's the real problem. It's that algorithms have become, you know, in some way they become they have dictatorial powers. They determine what reality is. And I mean, Flow Grappling goes along, CNN goes along, MSNBC, BBC, you name it, man. Like it's a world problem. It's a big problem. I don't think it's a small one. I think it's a big one, and it's going to be difficult for future generations to distinguish, you know, reality from fiction.
Yeah. People you like to say that you can't evolve, or you can't make your future bright if you don't know the history. Like, and how would you, or what would you say that we should all learn from the history of Gracie's and history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that could benefit us today, and how we could even like have the global expansion further, or have the local gyms growing more? Or is there anything that we can learn from the early history of Jiu-Jitsu that can actually benefit us in our future?
We're watching history be written as we speak. Kodokan made a very big mistake by neglecting the round, limiting the rule set. They created a space, a vacuum for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to exist because they limited their rules. IBJJF was on the brink of making the same mistake. They were denying heel hooks. And by doing that, they're creating a space for something else to exist. We call it submission only. And I'm like, and I, not to toot my own horn, but I've been saying this to IBJJF for 4 years. You guys have to legalize heel hooks. And you're like, the injuries. You guys have to legalize heel hooks. If you don't do this, you're going to make the same mistake Kodokan made, and you're going to create the space for something else to exist because you're denying effective moves. And that's what it comes down to. It works. It should be assimilated. And when you deny it, you're just giving wind to someone else to do something, compete with you. And they're like hesitant. And I think I played a small role in convincing them to legalize heel hooks. They just did it this week. I don't know if you saw, brown and black belts will be allowed to heel hook in no-gi competitions moving forward, which I think was the best thing IBJJF has ever done in a long time. And I think that's going to keep jiu-jitsu united. So by learning from history, I think we are able to change the present and make a better future. And that's what history is for. It is about the future. It's not about the past.
Yeah. Actually did see the articles. I saw a couple of articles, but the references that articles had were not that convincing for me. So to hear it from you, I think it's more comforting to know that might actually be true, and we might actually see heel hooks in no-gi competitions in next year.
It's 100% true. Like yeah, it is. It's 2021 no-gi competitions, brown and black belt adults. So now what's the reason to split? Because before, no heel hooks. We're ignoring half the body, which is nonsense. We've always footlocked people. That's stupid to say, but people say it, right? Because it sounds cool. But now, what are they going to say now? What are they going to say? Why don't you compete IBJJF? Oh, I don't like points. I get out of here, man. Like, you know.
And all those people that say that they don't like to compete IBJJF because of points, they will compete ADCC, for example, and that is also points tournament and stuff like that.
And the one thing they all have, and sorry if I sound like a hater. I'm not trying to put anyone, you know, truck trash, but like it's enraged. It's pretty not. It's nonsensical, really. The reason all the people who complain about IBJJF, if you notice, are the ones who don't win. You ever notice that? I've never seen a winner, IBJJF winner, who goes like, "Oh, I hate this rule set." I'm like, it's always the people who don't win. It's like you're not mad at the rules. You're mad at the fact that you can't win. Now, a lot of people manage to win, so clearly it's possible. So if you're not winning, perhaps you're the one with the problem, not the rules.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like, it's not like submissions are illegal. IBJJF, they're acting like it's illegal to submit people. I mean,
that's true. Yeah,
it doesn't even make sense. Like, the criticism doesn't even make sense. It's just bitterness. It's just resentment over the fact that they're not doing well. So it's exactly what the Gracies did with the Japanese, ironically. If you can't beat them, what do? Modify the rules, and then you claim that your style of jiu-jitsu is the real jiu-jitsu. I do the real jiu-jitsu. The real reason is they couldn't beat the Japanese at their rule set. So what do? Change the rules. This is real jiu-jitsu. What you do is fake jiu-jitsu. You see what's happening? It's history
yeah,
repeats itself.
yeah. It goes in the circles. Uh, to talk about the what happened to judo as rule wise and how jiu-jitsu is going to be evolving. Uh, my pet peewee is always been Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the Olympics. What is your stand of should Brazilian jiu-jitsu be an Olympic sport?
You know, like, 1 second, kiddos. Get those balls, put them in the corner. No more touching balls. Okay, put them away. You guys can play, can talk, be quiet. Put those balls away. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yes, but not right now. Let me finish this and I'll talk to you about it. Sorry about that. So this is like a conundrum. As a citizen, I want to keep my money and I don't want to pay taxes. Or as an individual, as a citizen, I want great schools and great healthcare system and good roads and police that works. You see the conflict?
Yeah.
As a jiu-jitsu practitioner, as someone who's idealistic and passionate about jiu-jitsu, I want it to be the Olympics. Now, as an individual school owner, I don't want that, right? And there's a conflict because, yes, it would be beautiful if jiu-jitsu were the Olympics. Do I benefit from that? No. Most school, they'll put us out of business. The second government money floods into jiu-jitsu, we're out of business because it's going to be in every high school in the country. Would that benefit the sport? In many ways, but we're going to become like wrestling, and no one pays for it. I don't know in Finland, but in the US, no one pays for wrestling. If you try to open a wrestling club and charge people $100 a month, I'd be surprised if you can stay in business because people are used to getting it for free. Why would you pay for it? Like, jiu-jitsu is boutique. It's niche. It's expensive. It's an expensive practice. People will pay for it because there's a lot of added value to it. But when you give it away for free for years in high school, like, how are you going to charge people for it? So I'd be out of business, basically. So there's a conflict.
Or you would be a high school teacher.
I'm making a lot less than I make now. So there's a conflict, you know? So I think that I think that at some point the Olympic Committee will see the benefits of having jiu-jitsu, or maybe not. You got to remember, they're about to cut out wrestling, which is probably the original I don't have my Greek history right, but I think it's the original Olympic sport is wrestling, right?
That was since the first Olympics of the antiques, wrestling was there. So it was running, wrestling, fighting, and javelin or something like that.
It's very traditional, and they were about to cut it. Are they willing to add another martial art? I don't know. But you got to remember, the Olympics is not about what's best for sports. The Olympics is about money. It's a private institution, and it's not public. It is owned privately. So they're looking for money. So if they believe that BJJ will sell tickets, they will absorb it. If they don't believe it's going to sell tickets, they're not. That's what it comes down to. And if they do, it won't be within the IBJJF sphere. They'll probably create their own rules. Maybe Phila will take the charge. I know for a fact that the ADCC founder, Shiktanun, has tried to make it, has made moves into making an Olympic sport, but there's a lot of resistance. I don't know, man. I think that as is, we're winning. There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. Jiu-Jitsu is on its way to be the most practiced martial art in the world. It isn't yet, I don't believe. I think judo still is. But we're on the way.
Taekwondo might be even.
Taekwondo, I don't know, maybe who knows, man. Like I've never seen legit numbers. So, but I think it's fair to say that we're on our way. We have grown more in the last 30 years than all other martial arts put together. And I think
it's easy assumption to say that Jiu-Jitsu is the most growing martial art at the moment.
100%. Like I can easily guess that and be right. Like no one's coming close. I think wrestling numbers are probably, I think MMA is probably given wrestling a boost, especially in the US. But for the most part, I think the numbers are going down worldwide, other martial arts. I'll give you an example. my book is on Amazon now, right? But buy it from my website. I make like extra like few dollars if you buy it from me on Amazon. But
we can put the link in the description later. So,
but so I'm looking at the rankings, right? And at one point I was ranked number 6 for all martial arts books on Amazon. I'm like, holy crap, like, that's pretty good, right? Number 6, all martial arts books on Amazon. So I clicked on that to find out what they were, just out of curiosity, right? And it was all Bruce Lee, Art of War, Hagakure, Book of 5 Rings, the standards, and the rest of them were all BJJ books. It was the ones that you would expect. Hagakure, Book of 5 Rings, Art of War was the other one, and some book about Bruce Lee. And then after that is BJJ. Like BJJ was by far, that says something. I think that you're not seeing a lot of Taekwondo books that are like, or wrestling. I mean, they're there, you'll find them, but they're not selling as much as BJJ books. So I think that's suggestive as to where we're going. So do we want to change things? I don't know. It's working. We're growing, you know?
Yeah. I think the idea of like going towards Olympics is really good for any sport. Like it makes the sport like more professional. It makes competition better. It makes the sport better to be on that path to go towards the Olympics. But I think I've always said that to achieve that Olympic dream for Jiu-Jitsu, it would be like a death blow. It would be awful for Jiu-Jitsu because, to be honest, Jiu-Jitsu is not that fun to watch for people who doesn't know Jiu-Jitsu. Like people who doesn't understand Jiu-Jitsu, they get nothing out of Jiu-Jitsu matches because it doesn't look fancy. It doesn't look amazing. You get beautiful highlights, but to watch even 5-minute matches of 2 world-class Jiu-Jitsu fighters, it's not that like exciting for people who doesn't know Jiu-Jitsu. For Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, it's really exciting because you see all the small nuances and you see all the small movements. But for regular people, regular sports fan watching from their couches, they understand nothing about Jiu-Jitsu and it doesn't look very appealing. So for that, they would have to make rule changes, and it would be another case of judo having a rule change after rule change to make it more flashy.
You know where pro wrestling comes from? From the fact that they couldn't sell tickets from real wrestling.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is. They couldn't sell tickets because it just, the reality of combat is not necessarily entertaining. The UFC seems to like be the exception to the rule. They found a recipe that works, but it's unusual when you think about it. You know, it's like, I mean, I never thought boxing was that entertaining, to be honest. Like I'll watch it, but like I don't never thought it was. I always felt MMA was far more entertaining. But jiu-jitsu is hard to sell. It may be that we're stuck as a practitioner sport. Like there's this huge effort made in the US to make jiu-jitsu professional, you know, like, and I think the only one that's doing it successfully is Seth with Fight to Win. I think he's the only person selling tickets and making, everyone else is losing money. And I know how much it costs to run a show because I used to work for ACB and I've ran a show here in Vegas a couple of years ago. And they're not cheap, man. If you're thinking it's the fight purse that costs, like production is through the roof, man. You have no idea how much a cameraman and like sound people and editors and making sure your bandwidth is working. It's a nightmare, man. It's a nightmare. And they're not making their money back. Okay. Yeah. So is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? Because jiu-jitsu people don't want to buy tickets. They see jiu-jitsu every day. They're bombarded. They're on the mats. They see themselves as competitors, as champions. They're not fans. They're practitioners. There's a difference. I think jiu-jitsu might be better off being a practitioner sport, to be honest. Like, I don't think that the whole model, we should have jiu-jitsu fans. I'm not even convinced it's possible. I don't think ADCC, they're trying to make it like, let's make it like the NFL. I don't think they can. And I'm not hating. I'm like, I wish it were. I just don't see that happening because look at how much money has been artificially injected into jiu-jitsu. Like ADCC, ACB, the Kasais of the world, Third Coast Grappling, you name it. How many of these people have come and gone over the years? How many millions of dollars were dumped into trying to make jiu-jitsu professional? And they lost. The only organization that's consistently making money in jiu-jitsu is IBJJF. The IBJJF. And they follow a practitioner format. It's not a professional format.
They make their money out of people competing, like in
on the death.
Yeah. Worlds and Europeans, Pan Ams, they have thousands of competitors, and they get their money out of that. And on top of that, they get like sponsors that are like clothing brands or gi brands and stuff like that, which would never sponsor any other sport, and they don't get any other sponsors except those that can actually benefit from the crowd that is in the at the tournament. And of course, they get some like a spectator tickets and stuff like that because moms and dads need to buy the tickets and stuff like that. But the majority of the money comes from the license and uh, from the participation fees and stuff like that. So they make a lot of money in it through that in a year.
Yeah, and it's a very different model because their clients are the practitioners, right?
Yeah.
Versus a professional event, their clients are viewers.
Yeah.
It's a different business model, and I think that's why they have a hard time making it work. I don't think I don't want to be a hater, but I just don't see them winning that battle, to be honest. I think jiu-jitsu might be better off just being a practitioner sport, and it's not like we're doing bad. You know,
Yeah.
like I said, we're growing, so it's not like it's a model that doesn't work.
And it creates a lot of business opportunities to teachers and to gym owners and stuff like that. So it's not a bad thing. Like growing as a practitioner sport, it's a good thing. It doesn't have to be a spectator sport. I think only format that kind of has a potential to have like a lot of spectators is ADCC Worlds, but that is because it's such a small amount of people that can actually compete at the ADCC Worlds. And I don't know the finance of the last ADCCs. I don't know if they made any money or they lost money or anything like that. But it's not business still. I know the people personally who done ADCC World Championships last few years, and every one of them has done it just purely for the love of the sport. They have never even tried to make that as a business, I think.
Look, running a show of that proportion is easily costing them $500,000. Easily.
Yeah, I think so.
Easily. You know how much money they're not making half that money back. I'll be honest. I know how much these guys make. Ticket sales, they had what, 5,000 people show up, not even? You do that math, like not even.
Yeah.
I don't think they had 2,000 now that I think about it. Oh, it's the biggest ADCC ever, the one in LA, the last one. No, it wasn't. The biggest one was in Brazil, 2003. I was there. That was the most packed ADCC I've ever seen. 2003. That was the biggest ADCC ever, right? But it was. It's marketing, right? You keep repeating something, and it becomes the truth if you say it enough. But I don't know, man. I see what they're trying to do. I think that ADCC has kind of lost its way in some ways too, because it was special because it was different. If you're going to be like everyone else, are you different? And therefore, are you special? If you're going to become fight to win, I mean, maybe you'll sell more tickets that way, but are you going to lose that aura of being the Olympics of grappling? Like it used to be a tournament for royalty, and now it just looks like every other professional event out there. So they lost what made them special, in my opinion. I mean, let's see how it happens. Like it might be good. It's hard to say because it's still, they're making these changes and they're trying to make it like the NFL, but I don't know. ADCC was something, it was special not because of the lights and fireworks. That's not what made ADCC special. So you just don't want to lose that. What made it unique that's the key ingredient, not the fireworks. Those are overrated.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. The talent and the level of the competition is always by far the better thing than lights and flamethrowers and whatever you can put on the production side. Of course, I understand if you want to make it look beautiful, then it's always attracts more attention and stuff like that.
You know what? It's and these are simple changes, but it's a matter of respect and credibility. Like when Gordon Ryan won the Open, he flipped off the crowd. He stuck both his fingers out in the air and said, "Fuck you" to the people who are applauding him, which is nonsensical. Is like, it doesn't even make sense. These people are literally applauding you and you're giving them the middle finger. All right. I can't imagine that happening in the Olympics in judo. I can't imagine a guy winning a medal in the Olympics in judo and flipping off the crowd and the IJF and the Olympic Committee not doing something about it. I just can't imagine that. But that's why they're taken seriously. An organization that allows that to happen, will they be taken seriously in the future if they keep allowing like a shit show like that? In my opinion, like, you know, we have like exchanges going on in concrete. They're literally like a whole sequence in concrete and the referee's watching. I'm like, dude, I don't know if I'm pretty sure that's in the rule book to do something about. But if it's not, you guys got to include that because it's insane. We have a whole 15-second, 20-second sequence on concrete and they're not doing anything. And when I messaged Mo once and I asked him, like, dude, you guys are going to do something about that? And he goes, oh, it's always been that way. And you think that's a good like, to me, that's crazy. It's like, so it's always been that way. So that's okay. That should reinforce the fact that you got to do something about that immediately, you know, and like little things like that, man. Like it has to, there are changes that could be made for the better. And there are changes that are being made that, you know, I'm questioning if it will make it better. But like, if you allow it to turn into a pro wrestling fest, you're going to draw that kind of crowd. You're going to draw the pro wrestling crowd. And if that's good for the sport long-term, I have my doubts. I think short-term maybe, but I can't see the IJF not doing something about a judo world champion who flips off the crowd after winning a world championship. I can't imagine them not taking some kind of disciplinary action. My guess was that they would deprive him of his title. They would strip him of his title. That's my guess. And it'd be warranted, if you ask me.
I would like to know what happened to I can't remember which country. It was some kind of like Eastern European country. The coach was stripped naked in front of the judges in the wrestling. I think it was the World Championships finals, or it was the Olympic finals or something like that. The coach was disappointing on some kind of result that the competition ended and protesting that he stripped himself naked at the mats in front of the judges, and he was escorted out from the match area. But I would like to know what happened to that coach. Is he allowed to be at the wrestling tournament still, or
there have to be disciplinary actions? Like, these things have to happen to keep, like, IBJJF. You know, when IBJJF began to grow, I remember well that transition. I remember the year it happened. It was like 2008, 9. That's where this changes really started in IBJJF. And then once it started growing massively, they started DQing people left and right. You know why? Because their belts were too old, because their gi was dirty, because their collar had a little tear on it, and they would disqualify people. These kids were saving money for 2 years straight in Brazil. They got lucky enough to get a visa. They were putting coins together to fly to LA to compete in the Worlds, and they're getting disqualified because their collar had a little tear on it. Now, it's pretty nasty. I understand that. But that's how they ended, because they became so strict. They had understood this is how we're going to get respected, is by being strict. I think that's how an organization gains credibility, is by gaining respect, knowing that you're competing in the Olympics. You can't fuck around, man. It's the Olympics. You don't want to be disqualified or being an idiot. But if you're allowed to do anything you want, how respectful is your organization, right? And you're going to turn into pro wrestling where there's no respect at all, and that's fine. But that's what we will become, and that's the crowd we're going to draw for the sport, and that's what children are going to be watching and going, oh, this is what the sport, this is how I'm supposed to behave. So it's more of a cultural issue than a technical one, really. And that's perhaps is my difference with some of the changes that are being made in jiu-jitsu as a whole.
Yeah, how would you change jiu-jitsu or ADCC in the future to make it even better and make it even bigger for the future of the big tournaments? Let's just talk about like world championships or whatever the top level.
I would definitely take a close look at the rule book. I think there's a lot of iffy criterias, a lot of gray area, a lot of people complain about IBJJF refs, but I think they're better trained, to be honest. There's no way around that. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but it's certainly the case. I know for a fact that these guys are going through constant training. And if you read the IBJJF rule set, it's huge. The ADCC one is very small because it's not covering all situations. So the reason a rule set is book is very much the same reason a country has a lot of laws. It has to, it's like a good attorney writes, you're going to write a big contract. If I write a contract, it's not going to be as dense as an attorney, but it won't be bulletproof either. So these things are reactions to how organized a tournament is and how much thought has been put into organizing. I'd definitely make some changes to the rules, more referee training. I think that I saw a lot of bias. in terms of what they were allowing there. Maybe I'm seeing too much, but you know, I'll give you an example. Gordon Ryan walked out after Buchecha in the final of the Open. Did you notice that? He walked out after Buchecha. Now, what is that?
Yes.
Like, what planet are we on where Gordon walks out? Normally, the champion, the favorite, the guy reigning, the king, he walks out after, right? In the UFC, it's always. And ADCC, they flip it around. And I think they wanted Gordon to win so badly. I think that was a reaction of that. You know, to me, it's insane. Like, Buchecha's far more accomplished than Gordon. There's not even a question. It's not even close, you know, but they did that. And I think that, I don't know, like it didn't, not to mention, there's a lot of other situations that I was observant of, and I don't feel it was impartial. So they'd have to recheck, like, what, you know, is this about what's best for submission grappling, or is this like, oh, we really want to put a, I mean, we're trying to distance ourselves from IBJJF, which is some of what the organizers are very open about. Like, they don't like IBJJF. So are we going to punish their competitors to make sure that we get the message comes across that these grapplers over here are superior to those grapplers over there? It's a symptom of the split that has been going on in jiu-jitsu for many years. And I saw some of that at the last ADCC. It wasn't out in the open, but it was there. It was certainly present. You can feel it in the air. There was definitely favoritism. At
It's
least
pretty hard to say that, for example, one organization has better fighters than the other organizations. Like, let's talk about ADCC, IBJJF. The top fighters in ADCC are the top fighters in IBJJF as well. So for me, it has never been which organization has better fighters or anything like that.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
You are champion in both of the organizations. So that's kind of like validating to the fact that most of the ADCC champions are also IBJJF champions.
I agree with you. I don't think that that's what's coming across. If you pay close attention, you know, there's been a lot of, like, there's a half a dozen competitors that are not IBJJF, and there's been a push to put them in the spotlight, if you pay attention to the press and some of these organizations, and they're not in the IBJJF circuit, and there's been a push to make them sound like they're extraordinary in some way. And you know, I don't think that, I mean, if you take a close look at the last ADCC, the vast majority of champions were IBJJF champions, not even close. But I remember got in an argument with someone, and they were trying to say it was the other way around. Like, it was the Danaher guys and the Australians who were killing it. And I'm like, well, if you look at the actual numbers, like, almost every guy who won, with like Gordon is the exception, really, is 100% an IBJJF competitor, like his whole life. You know, like that has,
well, and also Gordon has won IBJJF tournaments. He's Pan Am champion and he's world champion Nogi. So it's not like he's never fought a IBJJF tournament.
And by legalizing heel hooks, IBJJF just did, it was a stroke of genius. They just killed it, because now all what's going to happen is they're going to absorb all these other competitors into their network. That's what's going to happen. All these other guys that love heel hooks are going to compete IBJJF. So what's going to happen as a result? They're going to become more and more alike. They're not going to be different anymore. They don't differ technically because they compete under the same rules, and you have the same framework. You have the same practice. So you have the same art as a result. Right. So it was probably the most positive thing IBJJF has ever done for jiu-jitsu in a long time, has been legalizing heel hooks. I'm very happy they did that.
That's good. So if people want to follow you and find your book or your film and everything, please let them know. I'm also going to write them down on the description, but please let people know where they can find you.
Yes. I'm more active on Instagram. I'm not very active on Facebook. At Robert Drysdale JJ. My website, robertdrysdale.net. The film is closeguardfilm.com. That's where you can get the book. That's where you're going to get the documentary when it's out. It is not out yet. And yeah, if you're ever in Vegas, come visit. I am not political. I'm very proud to say that. Every now and then you got to boot someone out of the gym, but that's as much political as I get, you know, for the most part. Like, everyone who comes to my gym is welcome and is treated like family, and I like to keep it that way. If you're ever in Vegas, please stop by, and hopefully I'll be in Finland soon once this crazy pandemic is over, and we'll be able to chat in person. And yeah, just want to say hi to everyone in Finland and keep up the good training.
Thank you very much. Thank you for accepting my invitation. And it was very fun for me. I learned a ton from about the history of Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm for sure gonna grab the book and watch the documentary when it's released. Thank you very much. Ja kaikille katsojille siihen vielä suomeksi loppuun perään. Kiitoksia ja muistakaa tykätä ja painaa kelloa.
What he said.
Yes. Kiitoksia kaikille. Muistakaa tilata kanava, painakaa peukkua ja klikatkaa kelloa. Ei muuta kuin palaillaan.